Let's talk about the power that K-12 public schools have to restrict their students' speech when that speech is reasonably perceived as advocating for illegal drug use for minors. So this brings us to a U.S. Supreme Court case called Morse versus Frederick. It was written by Chief Justice Roberts fairly early on in his career, and it involved some very interesting facts. So around this high school, you had a nationally televised event. It was a school-supervised and school-sanctioned event. And Principal Morse, she saw some students across the street unfurl a 14-foot banner. She crossed the street, she was very upset, and she told them to take that banner down. And what did that banner say? Why was she so mad? The banner said "Bong hits for Jesus" with the number 4 instead of the word "for." All but one of the students complied. One of the students, a man named Joseph Frederick, who was a senior in high school, refused. So she confiscated the banner. She told Frederick to meet her in her office. He did, and she told him that he was suspended for 10 days. So Frederick got with some attorneys, and he sued the school district, specifically the principal, actually. He sued the principal, Principal Morse, so that's why it's Morse v. Frederick. Morse lost at the Ninth Circuit. They were like, yeah, no, she violated his First Amendment rights. So this gets up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we want to know if his First Amendment rights were violated and if he can get damages from them. So the U.S. Supreme Court ends up holding that school board policy, which exists, prohibited illegal drug use, and schools have the right to adopt that type of policy. They can prohibit students from advocating for illegal drug use for other students on campus or at school-sanctioned, school-sponsored events. They bring up that drug use, illegal drug use, is very harmful to minors, and this is important here. Schools, therefore, have a compelling interest in doing so. And they bring up cases in the past, like Tinker, about how stuff needs to really interfere with the discipline, appropriate discipline, basically. And yeah, they basically kind of add this new rule that says, okay, they have a clear and obvious interest in preventing students from advocating illegal drug use to one another. And Bong hits for Jesus, that message, that was doing exactly that. So they said that Joseph Frederick could not recover under First Amendment grounds. He was suing under 1983, by the way, Section 1983, which allows you to sue someone, a government official, for violating your rights. So he was specifically alleging First Amendment violations here. So then we have some concurrences and a dissent. We have Justice Thomas concurring, who says that Morse wins simply because the Constitution does not give students the right to free speech in public schools. So he's got a very textualist interpretation. He's like, okay, no, I looked at the First Amendment. It doesn't seem to treat public schools as some special place. So Thomas is surprisingly deferential to the government in this sense. Deferential to the government in the form of the public school's ability to censor students, to restrict their speech. He says, yeah, you know what, they go to school, and then when they go to school, there's this thing called in loco parentis, where the school stands in place of the students' parents. So they're their parents. Parents can censor their students for a lot of stuff. I mean, they can send you to your room for saying anything they find offensive, whatever. They're the guardian. Parents are not the government. School is the government, but they basically become the parents of the students when the students go to school. So in Justice Thomas's view, they have the power to restrict a lot of free speech. Then we have a Justice Alito and Kennedy concurrence. So they say they join the opinion on the understanding that it only means, first, that public schools can restrict speech a reasonable observer would interpret as advocating illegal drug use, and that it provides no support for any restriction of speech that can plausibly be interpreted as commenting on a political or social issue like the war on drugs or legalizing marijuana for medical use. What this is basically getting at is we do not want to censor political speech at schools. We don't want to censor it on either side of the aisle, progressive, conservative, centrist, libertarian, anarchist, communist, whatever. You get to speak about politics. That is very, very much protected speech. So he's saying, yeah, so if the speech is political and it relates to drugs, then no censoring that. And as long as this opinion is saying that, we join it. So then we have Breyer, of course, concurs. He's a liberal-ish justice, a little more toward the center, and he says, I actually don't see this as a First Amendment case at all. We do not need to decide any First Amendment issue here. He says that Principal Morse wins on qualified immunity. So yeah, that's not really First Amendment analysis, but it's how a justice saw it that, yeah, the First Amendment is not really implicated here. Then we have a dissent from Justice Stevens, joined by Souter and Ginsburg. And Stevens was pretty upset because the court barely mentioned what he viewed as a very important fact. And the important fact was there were public cameras and, in fact, national TV at this event, this school-sanctioned event. And it was actually the intent, the motivation of the students to get this banner that they unfurled seen by the cameras. They wanted to get the attention of the cameramen, and what better way to do that than to write "Bong Hits for Jesus" on a 14-foot wide banner. By the way, the majority points out that the banner was easily readable, so it was presumably pretty big text. Obviously 14 feet is big, but yeah, big text. So yeah, they're like, let's get the attention of the camera crew. We want to be on national TV, because who doesn't? So Stevens is like, they were not advocating illegal drug use to minors. They were showing something to the camera people. The camera people probably weren't minors. They weren't telling students to do bong hits for Jesus. So yeah, he's like, okay, really, this is just prude. We can't be prude. You can't just see this and say, oh, well, this references drugs. So since it's referencing drugs and it's not even directed at students, it must be advocating for students to do illegal drugs. So yeah, he goes on to write, the school's interest in protecting students from speech promoting illegal drug use can't justify punishing Frederick for his attempt to make an ambiguous statement to a TV audience just because it had an oblique reference to drugs. Any advocacy of drugs was subtle and ambiguous. The court invented a new rule allowing censorship of any speech that mentions drugs as long as someone could perceive that speech to contain a latent pro-drug message. So yeah, he is not pleased with the way that they sort of overlooked who Joseph Frederick and his friends were speaking to. They were speaking to the camera, basically, the camera people. And they were not exactly telling them bong hits for Jesus. They were unfurling that banner. Or perhaps more accurately, they were speaking to the people who were watching the TV and got to see it on national TV. And in that case, you know, there could be some minors watching and there could be minors seeing that, but they're not on a school campus. But yeah, so this is a really interesting case. Lots of dispute about the First Amendment and what it should protect, and what power schools should have, and who's the listener here. But yeah, schools, there are a lot of cases where school districts win in censoring students, but generally there are some types of speech that are very, very strongly protected in school districts, like political and religious speech, statements about science, all that stuff. You can even say offensive stuff. One of the things that the majority opinion writes out here is that they reject actually Principal Morse's argument that the speech was censorable because it was offensive. And they say, no, that's taking it too far. We can't allow you to censor speech just because it's offensive. The issue here is the advocacy of illegal drugs. So yeah, that is a pretty interesting case. Bong hits for Jesus. Pretty funny, huh? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Hope this was helpful to you if you're in a First Amendment class, a constitutional law class, high school, college, law school, you name it. As always, please like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Morris, the Merrier, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.